Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Diane O'Donoghue, the Director of the Program for Public Humanities here at the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. Today's presentation, Potshots at the Empire from the Tattered Air Balloon of the Arts by Lawrence Min Bowie Davis and Kate Howe, marks the 6th annual of our spring series. To learn more about our program, our events, and our current project focus, please visit the Public Humanities link at the Tisch College site. I'd like to begin today with a land acknowledgement. As we join together today, we recognize that the land on which Tufts University has lived and learned for 170 years is the traditional unceded lands of the Massachusetts tribe. We acknowledge with gratitude the Massachusetts tribe and the Mashpee Wampanoag peoples, known as the peoples of the first light, to steward this beautiful land. We acknowledge in sorrow the countless injustices still to be repaired. Prior to introducing our speakers, I just want to note that the chat and the Q&A functions will be open throughout the presentation. Feel free to post questions or make a comment at any time. We will have ample time at the conclusion of the talk for your questions. And now to our speakers. Lawrence Min Bowie Davis is Curator of Asian Pacific American Studies at the Smithsonian Asian Pacific Center. He oversees the APAC Literature Plus Museum Initiative, devoted to rethinking collective responsibility for why we read and write. He serves as lead organizer for the Asian American Literature Festival, co-hosted by the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, and the Poetry Foundation, and is the co-founder of the pop-up Center for Refugee Poetics. His research interests include BIPOC literatures, solidarity arts economies, critical refugee studies, disability justice and queer and trans justice, ghosts and magic. He is also founding director of the arts anti-profit, the Asian American Literary Review, and editor-in-chief of its literary journal. Kate Howe is a second-year master's degree student at the John Nicholas Brown Center for the Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage at Brown University, where she is also a communication fellow at the Brown Arts Initiative. A poet and fiction writer, she did her undergraduate work at Washington University in St. Louis, studying English literature, American studies, and computer science, with a particular interest in Asian American literature and history. At Brown, she focuses on public engagement with literature that extends beyond academic and commercial spheres to challenge structures of capitalism, white supremacy, and colonialism. Informed by her experiences with slam poetry, she rejected conventional notions of reading and writing as solitary activities, and instead has sought approaches to literature that consider its potential as an area and vehicle of collective learning, one that facilitates collaborative and critical reimaginings around how we define literature, the relationalities it makes possible, and its place within the crucial work of political education and community building. It is my great pleasure to introduce this afternoon's speakers.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure to be here. Quickly, I'll say I am grateful to be calling in from Piscataway lands.
Yeah, and I'm calling in from Narragansett lands.
Welcome to our hot air balloon advance warning that my hot air balloon has my daughter wandering around it just outside, and she may bust in at any time. I sort of hear her in the background, so apologies if there's any interruptions. We're going to start with a tarot card reading.
Let me share my screen. Oh, also here's us.
Yeah, this is us pre-pandemic. Okay, so Kate and I are going to take turns reading this. So we've all drawn collectively the pandemic tarot card in our shared tarot reading. So the pandemic is the 30th card in the major arcana.
It has been a long year, like a long decade, one of atrophying time.
We miss the way it feels to walk in a city, in the current of everyone going somewhere.
We don't remember why certain things felt important in the before times. Do remember seeing a classmate in a casket on YouTube live stream.
The pandemic unmasks the lie of the word essential. Who provides care? Who deserves care? Death visited disproportionately on the poor, the Black and brown, the lower caste.
Returning to normal is an impossibility, brimming with longing and terror.
In the center of the card is a discarded mask, an iPad by a hospital bed. Say our goodbyes however we can.
Toilet paper has become a totem of survival, sweatpants an emblem of refusal, sourdough a gift of renewal.
All things will pass like a kidney stone.
When will we hold our brother's hand again?
Will our kids remember this as the worst time of their lives or as something strange and tender?
Will our dogs forgive us when we return to work?
Drawing the pandemic card in a reading means a portal is opening.
Where it leads is unclear, but remember people have always slept in doorways, huddled under them during bombings.
Who knows if the pandemic will ever end? A collective card. So thank you for opening with us with this. I encourage you to, as we start talking, to think about this as a reading for you, as a card drawn for you, and what it means to draw this card in this moment. We wanted to start here. This is an arts project, comes out of an arts project that I was a part of. A full deck of kind of tarot cards meant to be adapted and to kind of think about the contours of our current moment rather than just using traditional tarot cards. And we wanted to start our talk here to kind of ground it in the exigencies of this moment and to think about arts-based practices and arts-based care practices. So this card specifically came out of a collaboration at the University of California, Irvine, and it was actually co-generated through live writing. It was a group of folks together, some out of the medical humanities, some English students, and open to the public, that we kind of asked to talk and think about the pandemic together. We gave a sort of like a series of like Mad Lib prompts, and people kind of filled in the blanks, and then we edited it on the spot into a card, and then had the artist Nguyen Coing Ling produce and finalize the artwork, and then we kind of cleaned it up. Actually, Kate, can you jump to the next slide? So it comes out of a larger set of tarot cards. Here's some of the other ones: the ocean, the Mog World Emergency, and then there's a whole. Those are just 7. There's a whole deck. If you could jump to the next slide, Kate. And to the theme of our talk, Potshots at the Empire, we see this project as interventional and anti-institutional, in the sense of it being a kind of meaning making that runs against the grain of institutional knowledge, or how existing systems for kind of gleaning our future, and for telling us how to think about our own wellness, wanting to suggest, or in some cases directly read into how they fail us and how they're not designed to care for us, and to ask us to look to illegitimate or delegitimized meaning-making systems, often art-based practices, to help us better diagnose what hurts and the kind of structural origins of our damage, and hold up alternative avenues for wellness. So this project came out of, Diane mentioned that I run an arts anti-profit called the Asian American Literary Review. I'm happy to talk about that and why it's I call it an anti-profit beyond it like losing money. I'm also a curator for the Smithsonian, so I'm happy to talk a little bit about that work. And then this is meant to be a dialogue back and forth between Kate and I, even though I've been jabbering for a while. Somebody just jumped in the chat who's asking who's the brilliant person who edited this brilliant project. And I think it's my partner wanting to kind of jump in and claim her share of the credit for being the editor for this project. So credit to her, Mimi Coop. So yeah, I think from here, I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk about a project that she's been developing and that we're going to kind of talk about together as a way to tease out this idea of writing back against the empire, working, taking pot shots at the empire. And it's actually, we'll come back to this, but Kate and I were kind of like going back and forth about what a pot shot is and why the hell we came up with this title for this talk and if it makes sense or not.
And on 420 nonetheless. My friend was just texting me about this. Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Lawrence, for opening our time with the beautiful tarot deck. And yeah, I'm really excited to share this budding project that I have been working on developing, currently titled Foundings and Findings. So Foundings and Findings is a workshop series that's interested in making found poetry out of Asian American movement archives. And so this project really grew out of a period of personal reflection that I was kind of undergoing, especially during the first year of the pandemic and in light of the uprisings for Black lives that were happening during summer of 2020, where I was really trying to think through and read about and just gain any kind of clarity for myself, what my responsibilities and my political solidarities are as a poet in these current times, and particularly as an Asian American poet. Because I think, speaking for myself personally, I think this term Asian American, which has also come increasingly under public scrutiny these past few years as well, kind of means, I'm not so sure what it means these days. And for me, and just in general, because as is often talked about, it really encapsulates such a diverse group of people's histories, issues, backgrounds. And so I specifically was interested in turning to Asian American movement histories to try to situate myself and ground myself in a larger historical and political legacy. And so that ended up becoming a turn into the archives, which is not something I have really ever vigorously engaged with. Being in a public humanities program also, I think, motivated that as well, since they're starting to learn about archives in my classroom as well. Yeah, this was really my first time rigorously engaging in archives as someone who's like not at all a trained historian. I was an English major. And I specifically just started with the archives of the Asian American movement, capital M, from the 70s, since that was when this term forged. And I felt myself specifically drawn to these kinds of self-published publications from that time era, written by largely student activists of that generation. And I think I was really drawn to those because it provided such direct access to the voices of the folks who were thinking and talking and organizing at that time around the issue of Asian American identity and where it fit within this broader mess that is America. And I was really especially struck by just like the number of parallels and resonances and through lines between what I was reading from those historical documents and like the types of issues that continue to be discussed in Asian American communities now. This includes gentrification in Chinatowns, police violence, anti-war and anti-militarism, like really the whole gamut. And I think seeing all those through lines to me was what I found to be very generative and grounding to really be able to locate myself in my current social position within this broader history that is a very dynamic history of political resistance. And so that's how I was engaging with those archives. And I was like, wow, I really think it could be fun and generative to share this with people in some way. And so I landed on the idea of found poetry as the method of engagement that I wanted to try out, because one, I think it's just incredibly approachable, and it really doesn't require people to have any kind of historical training, and also like you don't have to have any experience with poetry to make a little found poem with some source materials in front of you. Two, I liked that it was like a tactile experience, because at that point it had been like a year and a half into the pandemic, and I couldn't remember the last time I picked up like a pair of scissors or did anything with my hands that wasn't just typing on a keyboard. And three, I think I was really drawn also to found poetry as an exercise that is inherently curatorial and that empowers the person who's engaging with it to exercise like some kind of curatorial practice, as in like looking at what's in front of them and cutting out, making selections, choosing what feels resonant, what feels maybe not as relevant right now, and then arranging it in front of them in a way that feels meaningful. So yeah, foundings and findings is basically, the hope of it is to try to take this found poetry workshop on tour to different archival sites, Asian American movement archives specifically, around the country. And what you're seeing on screen right now is actually 2 found poems that were made by undergrad students at UVA when I ran this workshop in a War and Asian American literature class there last December. And I love these two examples because I think they really demonstrate kind of some of the range that found poetry can offer in terms of the way in which people can express themselves through it, and that it can be very text-based. Like the one on the left, I think incorporates a lot of text and has some, like you can really read through it and it has a bit of like a narrative to it. And then the one on the right is much more imagistic and is more of a visual experience. So it really allows for many different modes of engagement. Yeah, that's the gist. Lawrence, do you think did I cover that about right?
Yeah, I have lots of questions or lots of things to talk through, but yeah, I want to take this found. I did take this found poem workshop one time, but I want to see it as it. I love that it takes different shapes in different spaces, or it's very contextual. Remind us again. So this one that you're showing us was from an undergrad English class at UVA?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And was this like
Yeah.
a predominantly Asian American space or no?
It actually was not. It was maybe, I would say, from what I was doing it, like they were in the classroom together. I was a floating head on Zoom, but from what I can tell, it was not predominantly an Asian American classroom. But they had been reading Asian American literature all semester long, and it was cool to also. I had brought in as some of the historical source material pages from the magazine Deidre, which was one of the major Asian American movement magazines from the 70s. And then they were also bringing in some text from what they had read in class that semester.
Okay, cool. You know, I was thinking as you mentioned that you are not an archival expert, how I am not an archival expert either. And then also I was like, I'm a curator at the Smithsonian, but I have no museum studies training. And then I reflected on the fact that none of my fellow curators do either. And what does that mean? And I wonder how that is a place, whether that's a place of anxiety for you or a place of something else. Like, what does like non-expertise mean in this work, or maybe in this moment?
It's definitely a source of anxiety, but I think I can make anything a source of anxiety, so that's not very special.
That is a magical power.
Yeah, but I think one reason why I've really enjoyed and working with APAC, like you and other curators at APAC, and what I found so valuable is that I think what y'all bring as like non-experts in the museum field, quote unquote, is a center that does really innovative and interesting museum work, particularly since APAC doesn't have a building. I think your model, especially around doing culture labs and those pop-up exhibits in different sites, has been really inspirational to me. And so I think, just to give you a little shout out, I think for me, like not being an expert is also about thinking, is a lot about thinking around issues of access also, particularly with institutional archives that are usually kind of shrouded behind so many layers, so many barriers to access, both kind of formally in terms of like some university libraries you can't get into if you're not either affiliated with that university or kind of have like are a grad student at a place like Brown, or even just like I feel like on a sort of maybe cultural level, like I think the connotations around archives and like libraries and these like special collections can be so stuffy and connote like elitist academic vibes. And so I think something I have like really enjoyed about taking a found poetry approach to this material is that it's fun and it like doesn't require you to have like certification to I don't know how to read an archive catalog or a finding aid and all those things, and that it really like I don't know, I don't even really believe in this idea of expertise because it is really such a just a mechanism for gatekeeping and obstructing access to knowledge to people who don't have certain degrees or don't have certain experiences. And so I think to be coming from a place of non-expertise is incredibly generative because you don't have to really care about those barriers and those hoops to jump through.
So I love to talk about that a little more, like is jumping ahead in our kind of question sequence. But one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of our work together was like the idea of leadership pipelines as being anti-institutional. And in the sense of the Smithsonian, not having a devoted like kind of commitment to a BIPOC leadership pipeline for young people, like its internship program is decidedly not one of those, in that it's, you know, finite, there's limited funding. And so one of the things that I've endeavored to do is carve out ways to keep working with you and providing funding and support for you over time, among other people, as like a kind of not just a one discrete experience or like, hey, I've always wanted to come to a place for 6 weeks and then for them to forget about me forever, but to be like extending beyond that to a kind of longer term relationship of, you know, mentoring and advising and support and collaboration. And so building a kind of like de facto, not in name leadership pipeline, but trying to carve that out. And it makes it so I was thinking about this when you said like gatekeeping, because I think of like the standard internship as like, oh, we can bring somebody in to do our Excel sheets for us or like data entry. And like, even when it extends beyond that, and I think it's endemic to higher ed too, is to like look at students as kind of recipient, like it being a unidirectional, as opposed to like, the possibility of me learning from you, or the possibility of giving you opportunities to create and getting out of your way, or supporting that. And like what you're talking about with the workshop is kind of licensing people that wouldn't necessarily feel like they have an ownership over the material to take ownership over the material, or to play in ways that they might not otherwise. And I think within institutions, that's always kind of discouraged. And so feels important to run counter to that and to open up space for a pipeline to support you over a long term, but also not just to support you to do data entry work or to learn skills on the job, but for you to have like meaningful governance over the space and over the experience, and to kind of be able to determine, or to be an agent in your own kind of development process.
Yeah, wow, thank you for saying that. I think you just said that way more beautifully than I could have said that about this project.
Well, I was talking about internship. Yeah. You talk about
Cool.
the workshop. I don't know, how have you seen people respond to the workshop?
Honestly, I think the main response that I've gotten is just that it's a fun time, which I feel like maybe sounds superficial or trivial, but I don't think it is. And we also had this, I think, maybe a little later in our talking points, but I'll just bring it up now, which is, I think that this incorporating a practice of like play and wonder into engaging with history that was just oftentimes so stuffy and academic, especially people who are not in academic spaces, to me feels really really useful, because especially because so much material is also just like can be very depressing and very heavy. And so I think there's something about just like literally just picking up a pair of scissors or like teaming up with a friend and making something together, and like using a glue stick or using some tape and shaping something on a piece of paper in front of you. I think I don't know, I think for me and for the participants that I have had a chance to talk with post workshop, like it engages something like a kind of little kid energy, and being in like an arts and crafts session in grade school again or something. And it's just like a lot of fun, and playful, and I think imaginative in a way that we're not often encouraged to be when it comes to like scholarship and research. But yeah, I like this. I think part of this project for me is thinking about this idea of research as something that can be playful and expressive, and about building relationships both with the material and the people who you're in community doing this research with, and not just kind of this like staid, like you're sitting in a quiet library reading a book and taking notes type of thing.
Yeah, like from I like that from your bio, the idea of like literary work or reading work not having to always be solitary, but being collaborative. Can you say a little more about like how you see relationship work or relationship building at the center of this project or of your practice?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I talk about this project, sometimes I think I struggle to fully articulate it, because I really just started with this idea of the workshops, and then you encouraged me to think about it as something that I could take around to different sites. And then from there, it's kind of like, it feels kind of vague and open-ended. And at first I think that was something that became a source of anxiety, because it was like, what am I doing? But I think talking with you and thinking about it more, like, I think this open-endedness and the flexibility for this project to really grow, depending on like, once I'm able to take it around, like getting to meet other archivists, other artists, organizers, community members, and talking about like what this project or this workshop may or may not activate for them, and how it feels useful, and how it maybe could expand into like other different sets of archives, other different types of arts projects, or like things I can't even imagine right now. I think that open-endedness feels really useful, because I don't, part of this project is like wanting the process of exploration to be part and parcel of its work. And so I say that to say that I think in order for that open-endedness to really to feel so valuable, it's because I feel like it is grounded in actually wanting to build relationships through bringing folks together around a set of materials, a shared practice of found poetry or shared exercise, and using that as a sort of catalyst or like a starting point to begin conversations around these histories, and also their relevance to everything that's happening right now.
That kind of processual focus sounds really antithetical to the way that classrooms work, and also to the way museums work, or a lot of museums work. And like, where are the deliverables and the deadlines and the clear-cut things that you're gonna, the learning outcomes, or, you know, the project outcomes that you're gonna complete. Do you feel like, does that develop intentionally for you, like a resistance to that, or does it feel just, it's just kind of like where it's moved to naturally?
I think I think both and, because I definitely, at this point, after having been in school for many years and or college, and then working for a couple of years and now grad school, if I have to like turn in one more project on a deadline with a certain like deliverable or like metric marker for evaluation, a part of me dies. And so I'm just like, yeah, I think while it's not necessarily, it wasn't necessarily intentional for me to really start the project this way, in a quite open-ended and in a quite open-ended fashion. I think actually, like, I feel like speaking with you about it it's kind of coalesced and solidified into an actual intention. What originally was just like maybe just like a reflex of like, oh, I don't really want to have to like think about this in super the terms of deliverables. I think at first it was like I said, it was kind of a source of anxiety, because then it was like, okay, if I'm telling people about this, how do I prove that it is a thing that is doing interesting work, or is meaningful in some kind of way, or is like reaching X amount of people, etc. But once, I don't know, I feel like once you encouraged me to think about the flexibility and the open-endedness of something that's generative, I was like, oh, you know, actually this does feel really useful and also kind of restorative to set that as an intention, and to really make space for like things that I can't plan for, especially as someone who's a big planner, to intentionally leave room for whatever might be stumbled upon either in the archive or in terms of people that I can meet through this project and talk with. Because there's like, this project came out of the fact that there's so much I feel like I don't know. And so it feels almost like presumptive for me to try to even make a plan for what might come out of it, when it's all about trying to figure out what I don't know and how to find answers to that.
Yeah, I think that was one thing that I'll like, as you've articulated that in the past, that's felt really appealing to me about this project, because it feels like a perennial thing that we have this historical amnesia about not only distant generations, but like recent generations of, in particular, like arts and political history, and that like creating a discovery process for keeping some of those histories from like disappearing forever, or at least falling out of circulation, feels so exciting. And in the ways that you've articulated, a way to ground us in our kind of current moment and figuring out the kinds of work that we want to do. I wonder if you could say a little bit about, you've mentioned in the past, like this feels, some of the processual and like the kind of flexibility of it feels exciting to you in terms of access. Can you say a little more how you're thinking about this in terms of like access or kind of disability justice approaches?
Yeah, I think that this is still like a very kind of budding thought that I'm working on. I want to develop more as sort of theoretical backbone for this project. But yeah, I do feel very inspired by the idea of building a culture of access as a principal goal of this project. And I take that term, culture of access, from the work of disability justice scholars. And really thinking about access not just as this like let's just bring as many people as we can into this institutional space, and more about structural transformation and transforming the terms that access takes place on. And I see that as part of this project, because I think, I mean, because so much of the sort of inequities and violence that is enacted by archives is channeled through the ways in which it institutional archives often put up so many barriers to the holdings that are in them, not to mention in certain types of archives, the like literal theft that took place in order to populate them. And so, you know, earlier when you were just saying like, you know, some of this historical material, hopefully keeping it from falling out of circulation, I think in a lot of cases, it kind of is already out of circulation.
Yeah.
Like when I was kind of conceptualizing this workshop and pulling from Gidra magazine, which I mentioned earlier, like a big reason, I mean, Gidra is really cool, actually. If anyone's interested, I recommend go check it out. But it's also because it's like one of the only magazines from that time period that is currently available online, and it was only very recently digitized and made available on Densho digital repository. Because other than that, like I think as I've been working on like compiling a list of like archives I might be interested in and taking this project to, and like doing the research, it's just become so abundantly clear to me like how hard it is to even just do that work, because like just like rifling through these library websites and like trying to figure out what is even in these archives is really difficult. And especially as someone who I feel like, again, it's like a kind of a training thing where I feel like I'm not necessarily trained to know exactly how to navigate these online catalogs and etc. But also it's just like there is just so much in these libraries that people may not know is there. And so, yeah, I think, and that is in one like very important way for me, how access is part of this project, just thinking about how to not just like open the gate, the metaphorical gate into these archives, but hopefully like find ways to circumvent that gate to begin with, or I don't know, just completely demolish it. And I think about that, and I think it's also that's also why I think the idea of using found poetry is really interesting to me, because I think, as I was kind of saying a little bit earlier, like I think another facet of the access problem is that the academy and these spaces for like research and historical scholarship are just like, I don't know, I feel like now it's hard to be interested in sometimes because it can be so stuffy. And I think it's, for me, like in my opinion, in desperate need of more creative and arts-based ways into relating to them and building new ways of relating to this kind of material that isn't just about like acquiring knowledge and then hoarding that knowledge.
I was sort of like, we've never discussed this before, but I was, for some reason it popped into my head. I was thinking about like wiki editathons, which I actually like and have done a bunch of times and I find fun, especially like the literary ones. Like Kuniman has done a number of like Asian American literature wiki editathons, and it's like, it's not the same as what we're talking about with your project, but it's a different kind of archive, which is supposed to be democratic from the start, except for the fact that Wikipedia is damn hard to, it's not hard to navigate as a user, but it's really hard to navigate as a contributor. And so like wiki editathons are necessary to teach people how they can actually edit Wikipedia and add on information. And like I said, I like them, but then I'm thinking, as you're talking about access, like the difference between getting more people there and like, you know, a culture of access that feels like more welcoming and that kind of shifts the terms. But then you're also extending to like structural transformation, which I noted in the chat, and like, you know, smashing gates. And I don't know how much like a wiki editathon does that per se. It's also not poetry. So like the writing stuff out isn't the most scintillating activity. No offense to Wikipedia. Like, I'm trying to think about this along, like, how do you see structural transformation happening? Or like, what are possibilities? Or like, when Kate takes this on the road to the Library of Congress, or hopefully in the near future, or any number of other, you know, archival sites, what kind of structural transformations might be possible?
Oh God, that is a really big question.
Oh, sorry.
But well, as you were saying that, actually, one thing I was reminded of also when you were talking about the Wikipedia editathons, is that also I'm not so well versed in this, but I believe that Wikipedia also has really like strict rules about what counts as a legitimate source of like to cite your information, because all the information has to have a citation. Sorry. And I believe that like some of their restrictions around that can be quite, I mean, like colonial, or just like, you know, really reflecting dominant structures of valuing different types of knowledge. And so I see that also as another way in which Wikipedia can and should be problematized. And I feel like that actually kind of also relates to how I'm thinking about this project in terms of like what kind of engagement with historical material also is valued, and like, again, like using like an arts-based approach, and one that's particularly using like found poetry or collage. I feel like I've been also thinking about those two terms interchangeably over like writing a research paper with a thesis and an argument and all of this like well-constructed historical evidence, which I'm not discounting that as valuable, but like I think that is obviously considered to be a much more legitimate way of engaging with history and getting something out of it, and like contributing a new type of knowledge or producing new types of knowledge, versus making a found poem, or like making any like this kind of oftentimes abstract or just not necessarily as like didactic type of art. But that still obviously holds meaning and is creative and does start conversations and different types of learning.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about like the when we hosted this workshop at the Smithsonian, or virtually at the Smithsonian, and like what you were talking about before, like the idea of finding like writings, or I think I was looking at like some historical documents, but also like snippets of poetry and testimonial like journals that you had, that work came from various sources that you'd supplied, that like almost spelled out exactly where certain folks were on particular things that feel like so resonant, like so echo things we're wondering about now, like almost verbatim in some cases, or like a direct paraphrase, but in the language of the 1960s or the 1970s, but it's so similar. And like what that does affectively, as opposed to like approaching it in a different way and making that discovery, like kind of stumbling upon that. And I don't know that has the same response for everybody who might come across that, but it does have an affective response. I think like there is some kind of emotional tug there, and maybe in many different directions, but that seems particularly powerful to me as something for you to kind of stage and restage across different kind of moments in Asian American political history and arts history.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out. That was definitely something I experienced too when I was first kind of like starting this journey into the archives. Like multiple times I would be reading like an article or something and being like, I could have sworn I read this exact paragraph in the form of like a shiny Instagram infographic with like the pastel colors and everything like 3 days ago. I could swear I just read that. And I think, and I think there's definitely, for me at least, like an emotional, an affective tug. I like the word tug there, because I think that's why I found this practice of turning to the archives to be grounding when I and am still trying to like just like figure out how I should be in the world right now, because I think there's something that's both comforting and also galvanizing about seeing these voices from the past struggling with the exact same things that I am struggling to think through now.
It's like a little
feel
bit
that
of
kind
like,
of,
you're not alone.
and it,
also,
I think
they couldn't figure it out either.
Exactly. I mean, if I'm feeling a little pessimistic some days, it is kind of depressing, but like I think for the most part I find it like it's like finding relationships of solidarity both across time and not just the present moment.
Or like, shit, we failed our ancestors, or like we didn't figure out what they needed us to figure out.
Well, these questions are just really hard and will take much longer than just 50 years between then and now.
Okay, so I'm looking at our time. I have other things that I want to talk about, but maybe we should jump ahead to the last found poem and read that, and then open things up for questions, and we can circle back around to various things depending on questions.
Sure. Okay. Everyone will get to see the slides. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to be sure to share this poem during a session today. It was made when I ran the workshop at the Smithsonian with the folks at the Smithsonian last summer. Yeah, last August. And it was made by two of my now dear friends, Sanjuri and Win. Well, I think Win's here in the chat, so hi. And yeah, I'll just read it out because I think this poem to me really encapsulates a lot of what I'm feeling about what makes this project interesting to me and meaningful. Let's cook. It doesn't matter what names we choose. This is an attempt to explore the possibilities and limitations of living collectives. Use your imagination. Try growing pumpkins, soybeans, Chinese cabbage, monster zucchinis, daikon. A consciousness of the common experiences. Though it was an attachment of years ago, I can faintly see the happiness of our faces as we went to a movie, for a ride, as we laughed or cried. some important contradictions cannot be resolved. So then we water, nourish. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That was lovely. Trying to figure out what the thing is on the right. Oh, okay. That was artwork of the garden.
Yeah, oh, I missed that actually when I was transcribing it. It says collard greens and then plants grow up with an arrow.
And do you remember what some of these materials were? Like some of the kind of source materials?
Yeah, the stuff with the plants on it was from a page in Teacher that was like all about starting your own garden and like what can you plant in your garden. Which is another reason why I think these like newspapers and magazines are really fascinating to turn to, because it's not just like all political polemic or like reporting on like the journalistic reporting. There's also just like there's a lot of art and poetry and like fun little pages. Like this one about gardening, the Let's Cook at the top of the page was from a different page in a different issue of Teacher that had a 2-page spread on how to cook. I think it was, maybe it was like chicken and rice or something like that. That could be wrong, but something along those lines.
I like actually. Okay, so as a way for us to wrap up before we turn to questions, I love that this was one that 2 people worked on together, that Sunzuri and Lynn worked on together, and it feels like, you know, as you offer this workshop, you know, sometimes people are going to do this in solitary fashion, sometimes they're going to do it in group fashion, but it's always a collective activity as a workshop. And I'm reminded of you thinking about a little bit about your slam roots and about like the idea of group poems. I wonder if you could say a little something about that. And because I've remembered you like waxing about like the power or there's some kind of magic in group poems that often gets lost in literary spaces, or, you know, non-slam literary spaces. And I wonder if you could say something about that before we turn to questions.
Yeah, if anyone's not familiar with the slam poetry world, a group poem is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a poem you write and perform with one other person or 2 other people in a group. And that for me was always like my absolute favorite part of doing anything slam, was getting to like write collaboratively with other people, which like often the process of that often looked very different depending on the group. Like sometimes it would be write your own thing and then you all come together and kind of piece it together like a found poem. Or like you might just sit down and literally write together, mind meld style, and come up with something that way. And then to also perform it together on stage, or to read it together, even if not like formally in a performance setting, I think that was also like a really powerful part of the experience to me. To really, like, because I think something that is really unique and powerful about slam is that it's also like an embodied experience of performing your poems. And so to be on stage with the people you wrote the poem with and to perform it with them was also a really just like special experience that I can't quite put into words, but I think that type of group writing and group experience of art making is not something I have really encountered anywhere else outside of slam. And I'll say, like, I think one reason why I love this poem by Sunzuri and Lynn so much, and the fact that it was co-written, is because I did not, like, that was not my plan or intention at all going to the workshop. Like, that was not like an instruction I offered or even an option that I offered. I think they just, they were together and they did it together. And it just like, it made me so happy to see that and to see what came out of it. Yeah, and I think that's like, I come back to this poem because it reminds me of the type of the way in which I hope relationships and the community building can be centered in this project.
I like the suggestion. I wrote it. I did not even offer it as an option because I like the undertone of like irreverence, or they sort of did whatever the hell they wanted, which feels a little like the spirit of our talk in some ways.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Lawrence and Kate, do you have additional material that you want to make sure that we cover before we open to questions and answers? We've put in some prompts just to make sure that people pose questions or comments, but don't want to turn to them too soon. We still have time, so feel free to continue. We have until 6.
Kate, I don't know if you brought any materials that you wanted to link to. You know, I have various thoughts about things, but I'm happy to go to questions because I feel like they'll come out in the process of answering questions.
Yeah, I'll link to, oh, I have the link. I'm gonna pull up. So I prepared a Google Drive folder of the material, actually the same materials that Sundari and Wynn made that poem out of, that I wanted to share with all of y'all in case anyone is looking for a night in with doing a fun little found poetry exercise. So I'll share that in the chat if so. But yeah, I'd love to open it up to if folks have any questions right now also, but Lawrence and I can keep talking as well.
Oh, So Young has a question that I feel like is one for you, Kate.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. Wait, sorry, where am I looking for this question?
Oh, it's right above where you dropped it in the chat. I mean, dropped the link.
Okay.
It's also in the Q&A.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you for that question. Soyoung asked, said, "Let's Cook is such a wonderfully vibrant poem. I would love to learn more about how the poem was translated from the visual and tactile to typed text." Wow, I'm glad you asked that because I actually did that like 30 minutes ago, right before this presentation. Just because when I put the picture on the slide, I was like, oh, I don't know if that might be hard to read. Yeah, I think I was mostly I wanted to preserve the sort of like arrangement on the page as much as I could of the text. But I wasn't sure how to deal with or how to translate the like the red waves on two parts of the page that you see, since it's more of an image. There's some text on those pieces, but like when I was trying to recall how Sundari and Wynn read it out loud, I don't think that text was included. But yeah, I was mainly just thinking about how to preserve the positions, because to me that felt like the most kind of the defining structure of the poem. But yeah, I can't say that I put so much intentionality into it.
I pose a question that, first of all, thank you so much for this, and also apologies for having to spend many long minutes looking at me waiting for a prompt to start. I didn't realize that Jez was emailing me and I'm just waiting. So we lost a few minutes to start, and I'm sorry about that. One of the questions that comes up with museums is materiality, the focus on the object, and then the reception of that object by the visitor. This really opens up so many questions, including the one that was just posed about the different ways in which the notions of materiality gets presented, but also the ineffable, that which can't materialize, or that which is elusive and difficult to materialize. And it feels like the turn to literature and the turn to this work away from objectness in the museum setting is so important and so provocative. And I'm wondering if either of you could speculate on what the world of your literary interests and engagements could actually bring, and I'm speaking as an art historian, to the studies of the object as it would sit before us. Because they can be very mute and silent and susceptible to so many narratives placed on them.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Diane. Actually, Lawrence, and I can put you on the spot. I feel like I've heard you talk so much about like your work with the Literature and Museums Initiative, or just thinking about literature in the museums more broadly, as in part being about, or maybe, I don't know if divorcing is the word you would use, but kind of decentering the idea, the equivalence of literature with the object of the book, and thinking more broadly about that. And I feel like, I don't know, if you'd want to talk about that, I feel like that might speak to Diane's question.
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to remember what you're referring to, or what I might have said before, if it, if it made any sense.
Oh no.
No, I can find it somewhere. I guess so maybe one starting place for both of us, Diane, Kate and I, is, you know, the Asian Pacific American Center and the Smithsonian, for both of us having worked there, is like mostly a non-public facing space. It doesn't have a permanent collection, and it doesn't have a gallery. So we put on public programs, we create exhibitions, or that's what we've done for a really long time. We've also started calling ourselves a migratory museum by doing pop-ups all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think like one of those things is like, okay, well, for a migratory museum, then we locate museumness not in the walls, because we don't have those. But we also don't locate it purely in the objects either, because we don't have those either per se. But somewhere in like, started thinking about like that kind of experiential friction between the object and the visitor, or between visitor and visitor, or visitor and space. And I wanted to think about literature in those ways too, because I feel like literature is often so quieted to like the solitary, like Kate has thought about, and like sitting and reading, or sitting and writing, or sitting and reading out loud, and sitting and listening. And I don't know, as Kate was talking about slam, that feels like a really wonderful way to maybe re-inject the communal and like all of that friction that we're talking about, and like how experiential it is, and how interpersonal, and how it involves like these layers of exchange. But also, Kate, what did you use? Like you said, embodiment. Like I feel like there's a lot there, and that is maybe always part of the museum experience, or engaging the material, but it often isn't maybe intentionally activated. Or, you know, some of the work of museums over the last 10 to 15 years seems to be like trying to come back to that, or remember what community engagement is, or to rethink about how to make museums, you know, interactive and participatory and experiential. And I think that it's maybe already contained in the literary, in the ways that Kate and I have been trying to stage things.
Right. It feels that way. I mean, it feels like there's a lot that your work can offer to those other Smithsonian institutions that have walls and have objects. It would be wonderful to imagine future dialogues with art historians around some of these questions. I think there are those that would be open to it. And we have a question on curation, which is sort of somewhat related. So Simi Kang says that I'd love to hear what curation means for each of you, particularly given your discussions about accessibility, gatekeeping, and expertise.
I think this means Kate has to answer first.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think of curation, especially as someone who really does not have much kind of formal training as a curator, like I really hesitate to call myself that. I think when I think of it, it's an exercise and a practice in what are the different permutations of like arranging a set of items or a set of texts or whatever material is in front of you. That can be like material or like, I don't know, like a program or an event. Like whatever you're working with, like what is the way of, what are the different permutations of that which create meaning, or some kind of like resonance or point of interest or point of learning, which, yeah, I think is different from what I consider to be maybe a more like institutional or kind of conventional definition of curation, which is often, at least the way that I've encountered it, like about kind of like translating knowledge from like an archive to like the public, quote unquote. Like it's about kind of a transmission of knowledge that I think is inherently hierarchical in ways that that I take issue with, kind of along the lines of everything we had been talking about with gatekeeping and expertise. But really, like I think as a poet, like I think writing a poem is in a way an act of curation, like because when I write a poem, at least in the way that I've talked about poetry with other poem writing people, like you're really like you're looking for a certain type of like friction, or just like I think of like even just the ways in which like people move around lines in a poem or like edit their poetry, and like it's really just like how do you present information and in a way that produces something that feels meaningful, and that something can be meaningful in a variety of ways to a variety of people. So I don't know, it's hard to, I'm struggling to explain exactly, but that's what I got right now.
Someone has added in the chat that the very act of writing a poem is curation, which is really a wonderful insight that one doesn't think of that, but that's exactly right.
I like that a lot.
I think.
So I'll say so the Asian Pacific American Center at the Smithsonian was founded in 1997 with the realization that even as collections had been plundered from Asia and the Pacific, that too little of the Smithsonian's collections and programming were devoted to thinking about the histories, experiences, art making, and culture of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and hence a program was founded. And then by the time I came along to the Smithsonian, the program had been clipping along for a while, but there was a kind of clear-cut realization across the Smithsonian that it had not been doing a particularly good job, along with basically every other museum everywhere in the US, of serving communities of color and other marginalized communities. And so curation was kind of most immediately about, for me, was like, okay, what do we have that actually engages this, or what can we create or commission? And then how can we welcome in or make available? So again, it like comes back to like Kate's framing of access. Like, what were the barriers to access cultural in a larger sense, in terms of, in terms of structural racism that prevented a museum space from in any way serving, in terms of its engagements or in terms of its outreach, communities of color and Asian American Pacific Islander communities in particular. And then I found that curation for me has had so much to do with trust and trust building, and like circling back to what we say about relationships. It's like in terms of working with artists and scholars, in terms of working with communities, like that welcome or that sense of lack of welcome, or the obstacles to access for so many people have to do with trust, or the kind of fundamental bad faith of institutions that so many museum or non-museum goers or potential museum goers of color, disabled folks, or queer, trans, and non-binary folks who don't feel welcome in institutional spaces with good reason, because those institutions have been mobilized to exclude them or extract from them or be part of their kind of like death mandate. And so is there a possibility of being in such a space, and if not changing from bad faith to good faith, having kind of human relationships and exchanges and kind of reciprocities within and across institutional boundaries to move resources and to kind of make possible, new kinds of dissemination of art making and kind of art history and culture, that, in the way that Kate, like, you're reaching for that, like, recent loss, recent past or distant past, and making it available. Are there ways to do that and kind of think about that kind of accessibility through only possible through trust? That seems to be so central to ways I've been trying to think about curation, is like that building and establishing and maintaining kind of circuits of trust.
Right. Mm-hmm. That seems like such a powerful and yet almost obvious, but it's as though it's hidden in plain sight as almost an ethical call, expectation.
Hidden in plain gaslight, maybe.
Well said, well said. I'm wondering, as we come up on the last 15 minutes or so, are there any comments or questions that you would just like to pose to each other as we begin to conclude? There's been so many areas that have been opened here, so many questions. We'd love to, I guess I'd also like to just ask both of you what, I think I know this already for Kate, but for Lawrence, where is your next major piece of advocacy / activism / Smithsonian work going? What are you working on or will be working on in the next year or two?
Wait, you already know Kate's? Because I don't know Kate's. Or are we talking about this project?
Well, I was talking about this project.
Oh, okay. I thought there was something else that I didn't know
either,
about.
So actually.
No. Just that it feels like this project has so much more. It has a trajectory, at least short term. It sounds like there's many possible things going on for it. But just curious about, for both of you, what would be, what are you imagining, even for things that are just in the imagining stage?
Well, I can say that actually as Lawrence is already starting to plan for, or Lawrence and I and the rest of the organizers have already started to plan for the 2023 Asian American Literature Festival now. Yeah, 23, which I'm very excited for. And I think part of this project for me also is, or one thing I'm excited to think more about is how to kind of, for me personally, relate what I'm doing with this project into potential programming or other forms of integration with the Literature Festival next year. I don't know if Lawrence, you want to say more about the Lit Fest?
That's great.
Yeah, I'll just say the exact same answer, but in a different way. Just there's a festival next year, and Kate, I'm excited to see how this project takes life as part of that festival. And for me, that's a project of this immediate work, or whatever kind of movement material, archival materials Kate accesses in whichever kind of communities, local communities or otherwise, the workshop engages. But it's also a project of working with Kate and supporting Kate, and then also seeing Kate's, for me as a curator or as somebody working at the Smithsonian, I'm excited not just to put on a festival or put on a program, but to be able to recognize in Kate someone that that the Smithsonian should be supporting, and seeing how her kind of intellectual and aesthetic and arts development can be an incubator or a process, or I said leadership pipeline. I mean, there's a lot of ways to frame it, but that's the work too. And I'm really excited to see, to just kind of be there to be supported and be a sounding board and be an advocate in terms of finding funding and providing a platform. But like that's part of the kind of curatorial work for me, or not part of it, like central to the curatorial work is like finding really talented people and then sort of getting out of their way and just helping them be them and celebrating that. And so I'm really excited to see where this goes and what Kate wants to do. And the festival is like that. I don't know, times whatever, like a bunch of people doing that and hoping to be a space.
It's not just me.
Yeah. Kate in conversation with 50 to 100 other writers and artists with space to kind of do what they feel is pressing and urgent in this moment.
And is that something that happens yearly or bi-yearly, or is this something very special coming up in 2023?
Both. They're always very special. It's biannual, but we've only had two. We had one in 2017 and 2019, and we were set to have one in 2021. And then our pandemic happened, and then we were looking to reschedule it for later this year. But because of the pandemic, we want to push it out because we want it to be an in-person experience. So it's going to hold until 2023, and then hopefully continue on an every other year cadence going forward. And so Kate is, a programmer and doing this program. She's done past things, but she's also, which we haven't mentioned, a kind of central organizer for the festival and responsible for its larger architecture, in addition to like the things that she directly has her hands in.
Wow, so Kate, you have a lot going on as you finish up at Brown.
Luckily, I've learned as a wonderful, wonderful support. I'm very grateful.
Fantastic. So I'm just wondering if there's any, there's no way to sum up. How can you sum up a pot shot? Yeah.
Oh, we didn't get to talk about what that means.
But you didn't mention it. Yes. So maybe we can conclude with that.
Oh yeah. What did you tell us what you found?
Oh yeah. I had to Google it so many times. The definition will not stick in my brain. It was, what was it? Okay, a pot shot is a shot aimed unexpectedly or at random at someone or something with no chance of self-defense. And then kind of sub definitions under that include a criticism, especially a random or unfounded one, or a shot at a game bird or other animal purely to kill it for food without regard to the rules of the sport.
There we go. I feel like art's work in relationship to empire and kind of lasting histories of colonialism are hopefully, I feel like we're beneath the radar so much that there's like the unexpected or at random part of it. It's with no chance of self-defense. It's like conducted in the seams or in the moments where the empire doesn't expect it. And then like the idea without regard to the rules of the sport, like I think fundamental to what we're doing is hopefully disregarding the rules because the rules were not made for us and coming up with our own sets of kind of ethical practices and guiding impulses. And so we create pot shots. Maybe they make little craters in the fortress of the empire and little opportunities for freedom and liberation.
Well, I have to say, I think you've both made very compelling cases for that today. So thank you so much. And if we have any additional questions or comments, we still have a couple more minutes. And if not, I just would love, on behalf of Tisch College and our program, to thank you both for all the obvious time, thought that has gone into this presentation, which has so many layers and so much depth that it could constitute a seminar in and of itself that would span at least one, if not two semesters. So thank you for all the depth of thought that went into this. It's very provocative and wonderful. And the chat was filled with comments, both people who clearly know you and appreciated the materials that you brought, and also brought out wonderful phraseologies which one could string together almost and create poetry from it. So I rarely have seen such wonderful, engaged chat. So thank you so much for suggesting that we open it, that everyone participates in it in a very specific way. So thank you. This has been wonderful. And on behalf of all of us at Tufts and Tisch, I really appreciate this very, very much. And we'll look forward to many more Potshots, and I will never hear that word again without thinking of today. So in a whole new meaning. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you to all the friends and family and new friends that showed up for the talk.